Hello and welcome to Genealogy Gems podcast episode number 291. I'm Lisa Louise Cook. Well, starting on January 7th of 2025, Ancestry launched a new record collection, new for us as genealogists, and that's the 1921 Census of England and Wales. And here to tell us all about it is Ancestry's corporate genealogist, Crista Cowan. Hi, Crista.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Oh, thank you so much for coming. Boy, we love when a new record collection becomes available. How's it been over at Ancestry, the excitement around this?
You know what? Anytime we launch any major record collection, it's a big deal, but censuses are pretty special. That's kind of, as you know, the scaffolding for all family history research, particularly in countries like England.
Yes. Oh, and I'm very excited because my husband's grandfather immigrated here in 1912, but left lots of family over there. And so I'm really excited about the possibilities. And that would be interesting to know. Do you have a sense how many Americans have some kind of tie to England or Wales that this record collection is going to affect them?
Yeah, so according to the American Community Survey that was done in 2020, it's about 10 to 11% of the U.S. population that are going to be able to find close family members in this particular set of records.
Wow, that's going to be a lot of us. So let's start at the beginning. I'm kind of curious, when did the 1921 census officially become available? Have you guys had your hands on this for a while? And kind of explain to folks what the timing is on this census.
Yeah, so for those of us here in the United States, we're so used to the 72-year rule, which is what the U.S. censuses follow. They're private for 72 years, and then there's a big deal launch. And they're also owned by the federal government, and so they're considered public record when they are publicly available. England is a little bit different. The first thing is that they have a 100-year privacy law on their census records. And then the second thing is that it's controlled by the Crown, which means that when 2021 came along, it wasn't just publicly released. They went through a whole process of tendering and determining who they wanted to actually digitize it and create the index. And they chose a UK company to do that. And in order to recoup the costs, that UK company got to maintain exclusive access to that record set for 3 years. So Ancestry just got access to it because it is now fully public, and was able to launch it on January 7th.
Fantastic. And of course, that makes it available to Ancestry users. I think it's folks with a World Explorer membership. Am I right on that?
Yeah, if you live here in the U.S., you have to have a World Explorer or All Access subscription. It is included in both of those.
Wonderful. Just one second. So when was the 1921 Census of England conducted, and how many people did it cover? They probably had a start date like we do here in the U.S., right?
Yeah, they have Census Day, just like we do. And typically, like the way that Census Day works is everybody is supposed to record their answers based on what was happening in the household on that day. Now, a little bit different than here in the U.S., where all the way through 1950, a census taker was showing up at your door. In England, with the 1921 census, there were forms sent out to all the households. They had to fill them out on Census Day, and then an enumerator would come around and pick them up the next day. So Census Day was on a Sunday. The enumerator would show up on, Monday or that week to pick up those forms, but they had to be ready by Monday morning and completely filled out.
Well, and that brings us to the fact that unlike the U.S. Census, the people being enumerated were filling these out themselves. These are our ancestors, right?
Yes. Yeah, so it's their handwriting. I mean, in some cases, obviously, you're going to have some people who might have been illiterate or, couldn't write for whatever reason, but they would fill. So the majority of them are filled out by the head of household, but occasionally it might be another family member or a neighbor who could write. And in very rare cases, if the census taker showed up and the form wasn't ready because of that reason in particular, they would fill it out for you.
So when will the next England and Wales census be available? Do we have a long wait?
Yeah, so there's kind of some tragic circumstances. The 1931 census in England, which would typically have come out in 2031, it was destroyed as part of kind of the bombing of London and a lot of the destruction that took place during the Second World War. And then because the World War was actually occurring in the middle of 1941, when they would have taken that census, that census was skipped. And so the next census that was taken in England was in 1951, which means it won't become publicly available till 2051. So there is another 30 years almost before there will be another publicly available census in England. So that makes this even more significant.
It really does. I mean, this is something that we're going to kind of have to hang our hat on for a while and then turn to other kinds of records. But it's going to give us so many clues. And it's interesting. You sent me some really neat clippings from the newspapers of that time. And I just thought, what a fantastic idea to go check out what was going on in the newspapers explaining about because the census was a big deal. So they were talking about it. And one of the newspaper articles touts how Sunday was Census Day. You were saying it was Sunday. Was it just that one day and it was the same for everyone? I was just thinking how complicated that must have been for them to orchestrate that all on one day.
Yeah, it's interesting because here in the US, when we think about the census, we often think about like the census, like there is a census day, which is you're supposed to answer the questions as if what was happening in your household on that day. But sometimes it would take the census taker weeks or in some cases months to get to your house. And you had to think back to like what was happening on that day. So this was a really different experience in England where they mailed out all the forms. And then they said, okay, everybody fill them out on April 24th. That was supposed to be Census Day in 1921. But then in England, there was this threat of a workers' strike. And there was like a couple of workers' unions that were rallying to strike. And one of them was was connected to transportation. And so there was this big panic in the government that people would be, displaced and that there would be all of this disruption. And so they delayed Census Day from April 24th, which was a Sunday, to June 19th, also a Sunday. And they ended up having to spend a lot of money to ship out amendment slips to let people know that they needed to not fill it out on April 24th, but fill it out on June 19th instead. And interestingly enough, in spite of that delay, this was considered one of the most successful censuses, like the most people who actually filled out the form. They didn't have to fine as many people for not doing it on time. But there was this really strange side effect of moving it from April to June, which was now it was summertime. And so what you see in the 1921 census is this increase in the population in resort towns and holiday destinations from 10 years earlier because people were on holiday. So if you can't find your family where you expect them to be, maybe on Census Day, which ended up being June 19th, check and see if they're in a hotel or a lodging house or somewhere at a vacation destination in the country.
They're all in Brighton, right? They're all in Brighton or Margate or, one of these wonderful seaside towns. That makes a lot of sense. And that newspaper article that you sent said it was like a 10-pound fine. That was a big deal.
Yes. Right? Yeah.
Wow. And, somebody who may be fairly new to family history might be wondering, why are we so, geeking out about the minutia about, well, it was this date or that date. But that can explain sometimes, doesn't it, Crista, why people aren't where you think they're going to be, or also how were they in two places at the same time? I have a couple of those in U.S. censuses where they're in this place and they're in this place. How did that happen? And it's about that fine line of the timing, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. And it also matters like how the question is asked, right? So if I'm a young adult and I live at home with my parents, but on June 19th, I happened to be on holiday in Bath,
Yeah.
right? Like the lodging house person might have put my name on the form there, but my mom might have also put my name on the form at home, just not thinking, looking at the questions, and it asks who are the children and not thinking about the fact that I'm not home on that specific night.
Makes total sense.
Yeah.
So this covers the 1921 census covers both England and Wales. Is there a difference that we're going to see if we happen to have people in both places? Did they have different forms?
Yeah, there are 25 different forms for the 1921 census.
Oh, wow.
And right. And not all of them are like 21 different like schedules. Some of them have language differences, like the official language of Wales is Welsh. And so they're going to have Welsh language forms, which is going to be a slight difference. But then you also have to think like the UK, there was a Scotland census taken the same year, even though that's not included in this record collection because they were stored separately. There's also, the Channel Islands. Then you also had forms for institutions. So unlike just like a regular household form, if you were taking a census and you were responsible for enumerating the people who were in your hospital on the night of June 19th, or they were in a boarding house, or they were in a boarding school, like you have to think about like kind of the different kinds of institutions that might exist. There were forms for those as well. There were armed forces forms. So if you were serving in the military or living on a military base or installation, there's a separate form for how they recorded them. And then, prisons, merchant marines, like people who are involved in shipping and, living on a ship or coming in and out of harbors. Like, so you think about all the different circumstances where people could be living on a single night. It's different than asking, what's your permanent residence? It's about where you were on that night, and they have to accommodate that.
That's a good thing for folks using the records to remember. It's about where you are, not necessarily your permanent residence. Thank you for reminding us about that. So I'm thinking about the difference between the last one we got our hands on, which was the 1911, right? Uh-huh. So do we get more goodies in 1921?
Yeah, the big difference between 1911 and 1921 is that now there's more details asked about employment. So you get specific details about the name and address of the employer of not just the head of household, but anyone in the household, and then the materials that they worked with as part of their occupation, which, when you're trying to tell family stories, or when you're trying to differentiate between men of the same name, those occupation details become really important.
Right. I mean, they may have been a welder, but in what type of industry? Because that could be a whole different ballgame. And then you start to visualize it differently, don't you? As far as those kinds of little tidbits help us kind of get it in our mind what it might have looked like and been like. Next, Crista and I are going to be talking about what we can learn about women specifically in this new collection over at Ancestry. Sometimes I think it's easier to find your family history than to find a way to share it in a way that your family would really be interested and enjoy it. We love genealogy research and we know how to do that, but how do you produce something that you could share with people in a way that's not going to take you forever to put it together? Well, I have a solution for you. It's our new sponsor, MyCanvas. MyCanvas.com is really the place to bring your family history to life. MyCanvas connects with your Ancestry account to help you create keepsakes like family history books and calendars and family tree posters. They can even produce books for you that include family group sheets and pedigree charts and history timelines. Those can be really challenging to incorporate and format in a book. MyCanvas makes it easy to add photos and records from Ancestry. You can incorporate birthdays and anniversaries and photos into a family wall calendar. I've done that, and I love it because not only do I remember my family's birthdays and anniversaries, but they're side by side with the ones from our family history. It's really a wonderful way and a practical way to share family history. And after you order, you can share a link with your family. They can take a look at your project online. They could even purchase a copy of it. And this is really nice when your family lives far away. The My Canvas products are great for gifting or displaying at family reunions. You know, it's a new year. You've got lots of birthdays and anniversaries ahead and get-togethers. So this is the perfect time to start planning and producing some of these wonderful materials from My Canvas. Pricing for these types of keepsakes that you can create start at just $30. So this is a really affordable gift and a fun and easy way to share genealogy and family history. And best of all, you can receive a 10% discount on your first My Canvas order with our special coupon code. So jot this down. It's GGEMS, so GGEMS, all together in capital letters. Use that at mycanvas.com to get 10% off and start creating shareable, memorable legacy gifts for your family. That's mycanvas.com. I want to take just a moment and talk to you about our sponsor, newspapers.com. This is a website that I use on a regular basis. I absolutely love it, have made so many amazing discoveries. And really, the new year is the perfect time to start or restart your genealogy research with fresh eyes and new goals. Get out there and find new discoveries. You can dig even deeper into your family history with newspapers.com. It's the largest online newspaper archive. So if you're a genealogist, you know that old newspapers help you find forgotten stories, and they can really fill in the gaps between vital records. And that's really where newspapers.com comes in and it shines. A subscription to newspapers.com gives you access to over 1 billion pages of historical newspapers, and they're from across the United States, the UK, Canada, Australia, and beyond. So whether you're tracking down your great-grandmother's obituary or you're uncovering a long-lost photo, you are going to be amazed at the treasures waiting for you in more than 3 centuries of newspapers. And when you find something interesting, newspapers.com makes it really easy to share it with your family and your friends. Get them interested in the family history. And you can even save it directly to your ancestry tree. Super convenient. So for you, my listeners of this podcast, newspapers.com is offering a special discount. It's 20%. Just visit newspapers.com/genealogygems. It's our dedicated landing page. Head there. It will get you that 20% discount. Kickstart your year in genealogy with newspapers.com. Head to newspapers.com/genealogygems. I was reading through some of these interesting backstory newspaper articles about the 1921 England and Wales census. And it was talking about Mr. Vivian, who was the Registrar General for the census. And he was talking about in the newspaper how there was an emphasis on understanding that housewives, they work too. They're just not a paid occupation, but they were working just as hard. He says, work probably as hard as anyone, which I think is absolutely true. And I would think this would certainly be a reflection of that growing respect for women's roles. They've just come out of World War I. Women have probably had to take up a lot of the slack on the home front, and things were changing. The vote was around this time. Talk to us a little bit about just what we're going to see about that story about women's lives in England and Wales at that time.
Yeah, it's so interesting because you think about how many total people that were enumerated in that particular census. I think the number was, let's see if I can get this right. I think it was 38 million. And of those, more than 12 million of those are adult women. And, then you have the adult men and then you have all the children, right? That's kind of how it's divided. And so you think about 12 million adult women, and not all of them are married. We've just come out of the World War, like you mentioned, and so there was an increase in young widows. And so not just respecting the occupations of women who are doing unpaid labor, but also recognizing that there starts to be, at this point in history, this shift in women in various new occupations. Some of those are traditional, women's occupations, nursing and domestic servants and those kinds of things. But we do start to see a tiny little shift, and I suspect this will continue in the work that those women are doing outside of the home as well.
Yeah, and this census can really tell us that. I know, if I'm not mistaken, at that time, there's also a shift out of domestic work, right? So there was a lot of in-service working for the big manor houses, and that's changing because there's opportunities in industry in town.
Yep,
so we'll see
absolutely.
That. Other columns, I love really taking a close look at some of the columns because we want to make sure that we understand as we read through the enumeration what they're really trying to tell us and what these markings mean. And talk a little bit about the marriage column because I would imagine they were seeing more divorces and people had privacy and personal concerns about expressing that on the census. What are we looking at in the marriage column?
Yeah, so the marital status column itself isn't new, but this is one of the first times where we see divorces recorded. And prior to that, I suspect that there were a lot of people who just, listed themselves as single or in many cases as widowed, even though they were actually divorced, just because of the stigma around that at the time. So this is the first time, and it's interesting. Even though it's the first time, it's still only 0.06% of the population over the age of 15 that is listed as divorced in this record set. The interesting thing, though it was not new, we do see an increase in the number of individuals listing their current marital status as widowed, which makes perfect sense when you think about the fact that World War I had just ended, the influenza pandemic had happened, and it left about 1% more adult females widowed than the previous census, but an almost 3.5% increase in young widows. More than 200,000 women applied for a war pension in 1921 because they had been left widowed due to the war. So there is a little bit of some, different things showing up in that marriage column because of the current condition of what was happening in their country and in the world.
Yeah. And there again, a clue to say there may be other records to go look for and see, like you said, a probate or a military pension or something like that.
Yeah.
We saw an awful lot of ages in the previous 1911 census that were conspicuously, they were all 30 and 40 and 50 years old. There was a lot of rounding up. But we see a little more accuracy in 1921, do we not?
Yeah, it's interesting because I think part of that was a cultural shift. So the instructions for the 1841 and 1851 census were to round. Like that was an intentional instruction given back then. And so I think what was happening was that there was just kind of an artifact of that. So even though they were being asked to report their age in 1911, I think there was just some kind of artifact of that rounding. I think there was also maybe a little bit, and we see this in other records, not everybody knew when they were born, right? Like tracking your birth date in the 1800s was not a common practice, even here in the US. Like it just wasn't as big of a deal as it is. We celebrate milestone birthdays and we make a big deal out of it in our culture today. But prior to that, it wasn't a big deal. But when the World War started, when social and government programs started, people had to become a lot more precise about their birth date because it became a part of their identity. And so I think we see this increase in precision in birth years in 1921 because it becomes more important as a part of your identity. And so they knew how old they were now and could report that more accurately.
That's interesting, too, because so many of us struggle with getting this wide range of dates based on these different records we're getting. So knowing the backstory, the provenance of the record helps us kind of decide how much weight to give it, right? To say, maybe I'll lean a little bit more. If the 1921, she said this, that I'll give that a little more weight than maybe 1911. Yeah. Interesting. So hopefully we're going to find who we're looking for. But who would we maybe not see in the 1921 census, even though they were physically there or maybe nearby?
Yeah, so I mentioned Scotland earlier. So the Scottish census was taken at the same time. They had a separate form, but there's this kind of weird thing that happened. If you happened to go across the border, um, you know, Census Day, you got your form and then you crossed the border and you filled it out and you turned it in. So there's a few Scottish census forms that snuck
Oh,
into the English census, and there's a few
sure.
English census forms that snuck into Scotland. And the Scotland census was processed and stored separately. So
Mhm.
the Scottish government has those forms, and they maintain that for their country. Another thing you won't find is Northern Ireland. So Northern Ireland, though it is part of the UK, this is not a UK census. It is an England and Wales census. Northern
Okay.
Ireland was in the middle of their War of Independence, and so they did not take a census in 1921 as planned. That was taken 5 years later in 1926. So you kind of have to think about, like, not only, again, where did they live, but where were they on census night is going to make a difference. And then military. So military military was included if you lived in a base or in an installation overseas. They were included, but if you were in the Merchant Marines, like, and you were outside of territorial waters, like you weren't on a base or an installation, they weren't always included. There was not as much care taken about that as there were about some of the other things.
Makes sense. Yeah, I remember when the U.S. 1950 census came out. I did a bunch of videos on the creation of that. I just thought it was fascinating, and it tells us a lot about how the country is changing, how the citizens are changing, how to interpret what we're finding in the record itself. And I found that newspapers were very interesting and very helpful with that. You certainly have done some digging into that. And tell us a little bit more about what you learned from newspapers and maybe other types of research that you must have done as you prepared to get this collection that just kind of told a bigger story about this particular 1921 census.
Yeah, we talked earlier about that strike that happened in April, or the threat of the
Mhm.
strike that happened in April that delayed the census for several months. And so now the census was being taken in June. And what that allowed was it allowed for the enumerators to be school teachers who would have been working in April, but now are off for summer break. There was an increase of them who were available for work. And that really helped, especially when you're dealing with a more illiterate population. They could review the form, or in some cases fill it out for the household, because they were, they had that level of education and hopefully better penmanship than the average person. There were several little newspaper articles that did mention penmanship, which I always find fascinating. There was some conflict over, asking everybody to fill out their own form because they're going to be less standardized, right? When you have a census taker going house to house, at least you have a series of households in a row, or an entire enumeration district where it's all in the same handwriting, and hopefully that handwriting is legible, and certainly enumerators were you know what's the word I'm looking for? Like, encouraged to have enumerators that had readable handwriting. But now you're asking every household to do it. And as I've looked through
Right.
some of the forms, like, some of them did not have great handwriting. But the enumerators at least had, the ability to read the form and understand if it was filled out correctly. Just fascinating, kind of some of the editorials that go back and forth in newspapers about the minutia of the census process of enumeration is kind of amusing.
I imagine the variety of handwriting also maybe created maybe not such an amusing problem or challenge for Ancestry as you're trying to index this thing. So, did you generate the index? Was AI involved? How did you tackle that?
Yeah, so back a few years ago when we launched the 1950 census, we had spent about a decade preparing for that census launch by training artificial intelligence, handwriting recognition algorithms to be able to index that. And So we've been able to leverage that now for a lot of things as we continue to publish new content, and I expect we'll continue to do that. Now, like always, when we publish an index on Ancestry, whether it has been indexed by a human or indexed by a computer, there's still going to be errors that creep in because of the variation in handwriting, because of the, there's a lot of different variables, the quality of the image, the, whether there's bleed through from the back side of it or not. I mean, there's lots of different variables, but on Ancestry, you can always submit a correction. So if you come across your ancestor in a record and some of the information that has been indexed is incorrect, you can add or update the information. There's a little link, I think it says exactly that, add or update information, and submit a correction.
I think that's such a great feature. I mean, you guys have always been very much, your users are kind of part of your business. I mean, they're part of how you craft and pull together everything and improve the collections that you have. I couldn't have you here on the show and not ask you about, of course, what are some of the things that you're most excited about, whether it's something else that you've recently done, whether it's collections or tools, or maybe you could give us a sneak peek, anything that's coming in the pipeline this year.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a couple of things. One is last year, again, leveraging some of this AI technology, we've applied it a lot to our newspaper collections. Newspapers.com has over 1 billion images. We crossed the 1 billion images mark last year. Wow. And yeah, and like there's gold in newspapers. Like sometimes it's just a little 2-line snippet. Sometimes it's a full-blown article with a photo. Like there are things found in newspapers that are just gold. But getting them out sometimes as an end user, trying to like put in the right search terms, and it just becomes really complicated. So one of the things that Ancestry has spent the last several years doing is applying AI technology in order to define what kind of an article this is. So that was kind of the first step, was tagging articles, and then going in and actually extracting the information to create like a fielded index record that could hint to your tree on Ancestry that then points to the original image that lives over on newspapers.com. And we've been really successful with birth and marriage and death records. But last year we applied it to a really unique situation, which I'm really proud of and is just so meaningful to a segment of our population. And that is, we created a collection called the Articles of Enslavement. So we went through newspapers and identified any instance where an enslaved person was named and or described. And sometimes these were articles about runaways. Sometimes these were articles about sales. Sometimes these were, any time that was a mention, because we know how difficult it is for the African-American population often to find the information about their enslaved ancestors. And so we've created a database on Ancestry that is a fielded indexed search, and it's free, to those newspaper articles on newspapers.com that mention that.
That's a really interesting application of it, is to be able to zero in on topics like that. I mean, boy, that's a great place to start. And then you think about all the possibilities. What are you most excited about? You've been doing this a long time. You've done it yourself. I know your extensive work on your own genealogy. And I remember the days when we just wanted to get our hands on all the records, and so many of the records now you guys have, and all of a sudden the beautiful blend of technology is kind of coming in and giving it another boost. What are you most excited about going forward in genealogy?
There's this interesting period that we went through. So, when I started here at Ancestry, it's been almost 21 years ago now, which blows my mind. I was in our content team for the first 4 or 5 years of my career here. And so I was very intimately connected to the historical record acquisition and the digitization and indexing and publishing process. And it was such an exciting
time. You knew which records we wanted to find.
Right? Yes.
They knew
and I would hear from people like all the time about what record collection they wanted us to acquire. And that was a really exciting time but you think about it, and 15 years ago, there were only, like 6 million or 6 billion or 8 billion records on Ancestry only, right?
Wow.
Here we are now, 21 years later, there are 60 billion records on Ancestry. Mm-hmm. And the rate at which we're adding records, like I just got the end of year numbers. I can't publicly announce them yet because we're going to do that at Roots Tech, but like the rate at which we're able to index and create and make available more records is so exciting. But the challenge is now, like, you were always looking for a needle in a haystack to find the record about your ancestor, but the haystack just keeps growing. Yeah. And so the technology that we're creating and employing with AI that we've been using for more than a decade now, but like making hints more accurate, making search results more findable, making trees talk to each other so that people can say, oh, you have this same person in your tree. Can we leverage what you found out about this person? Like, it's just making it so much more accessible to people. So I think we're kind of through the era of the race to find the records and, attach all the records. And what I'm really focused on now with my piece of not just Ancestry, but the genealogy community is, let's go back to your tree. Let's go back to that census record or that draft card or those newspaper articles that you attached 5-10 years ago in a frenzy of records attaching. And let's really dig into the story. Let's make sure, you did it correctly. And then let's tell the story about that person and about their family. It's not a race to see who can build the biggest tree. I would hope that it's a moment and an opportunity and a time to start connecting to their stories, to discovering their stories, to telling their stories, to sharing them more widely within our families, because I've learned that that's really where the connections come, not just with our ancestors, but with our living family members as well.
You're right. With an industry that has matured, that's, I think, the word I would probably use in the last 20 years, with maturity comes wisdom. And I kind of like that we're bringing the wisdom of the real purpose behind all of this was about the people and the stories, and they're not just names and dates. So very happy to hear that that's an ongoing focus. It's just nice to know that there's still so much to look forward to when it comes to family history.
Absolutely.
Crista, thank you so much for joining us here today. This has just been a tremendous opportunity to hear about a new collection, and we're just really looking forward to whatever you guys bring forward to us next at Ancestry.com. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Well, next up, I think we need to find some photographs to go along with our 1921 census, and the photo detective Maureen Taylor is here to help us do just that right after this. Today's episode is sponsored by MyHeritage, a global discovery platform enjoyed by 110 million people worldwide. MyHeritage has it all and offers a full-service experience that bridges your past, present, and future. The MyHeritage DNA Kit reveals your ethnic origins and finds your new relatives based on shared DNA. It's popular all over the world, and their constantly growing DNA database means that more matches to new relatives are just around the corner. You'll receive a percentage breakdown of your ethnic origins from 42 supported regions and weekly email updates as new DNA matches are found. It's also the leading DNA service for anyone with European origins. Make the most of your DNA results with a MyHeritage subscription and access advanced tools for genetic genealogy, like the theory of family relativity, autoclusters, shared ancestral places, and much more. Order your kit today at myheritage.com/DNA. Already taken a DNA test with another service? Upload your DNA data to MyHeritage for free to receive DNA matches and access new discoveries. That's myheritage.com/DNA. Today's podcast is also brought to you by Archives, your trusted resource for researching your family history. Archives is a vast repository of historical records offering a seamless journey through your family's past. Imagine discovering long-lost relatives, exploring genealogical documents, and tracing the roots that define your story. Archives makes research quick and easy. That's what it does best. And it does it with an intuitive approach to genealogy. They keep their search tools simple, but behind the scenes, their extensive record collections are paired with powerful technology to deliver valuable results. Archives is an invaluable resource if you want to make your family history research simple and affordable. Just visit archives.com and let your family history journey begin. And let them know that Genealogy Gems sent you. Visit archives.com or head to our show notes and you'll find a link that'll take you directly there. Archives.com. Hi, Maureen. It's so good to have you here. You know, I've been talking to the folks about the launch of the 1921 England and Wales census over at Ancestry, which is exciting. It's always nice to have a new record collection to be able to work with. And I got to thinking about you because I think that this census launch is going to get people thinking again about photographs. Because as they find people, they may be able to narrow down timeframes and realize, oh, maybe some of these photos I have are actually from England and not from the United States, because sometimes we don't even know where they were originally taken. What kind of clues could you tell folks to be looking for to be able to spot, well, first, photos from the 1920s? What kind of clues are you looking for that help you date photos?
Okay. So if we're talking 1921, we're sort of on the cusp. Like, there's this thought that as soon as we change the decade, everything changes. Cars change, clothing changes, makeup changes, everything changes. In fact, it's a more gradual process than that. So you might find people dressed, like older people especially, dressed in fashions of the teens. But for the most part, what you're looking for, the things that really help you date photographs that are snapshots, not studio pictures, are things like technology. What are people driving? In England, are they driving a Crossley, DeColish, one of those English cars, or are they driving an American car? Are they wearing those flapper-style dresses? Are they wearing those cloche hats? What are the things that you see in the background? Are there advertisements for particular products? And not just the products, but Lisa, you know, you lecture about Google. Mm-hmm. What kind of advertisements can you find online? Once we're into the 20th century, there's a lot more things that you can find easily online. So you're looking for all the background details. And of course, women's haircuts.
Right. They were starting to bob, right?
They were starting to bob.
Now that's interesting because you were mentioning about how they might be wearing something from more of the teens. Is that more common with older people in photos? When we see somebody who might be in their 60s, let's say, they may not be wearing the latest fashions, right?
Right. Well, and you can look at the borders of the snapshots as well, because Art Deco style borders of the snapshots. But, let's just have one caveat. When you have a snapshot, when they took it and when they had it developed are two totally different things. But yes, so I have a photograph of my grandmother and her mother. And if my grandmother wasn't in that photograph, I would think it was 1900. My great-grandmother never changed the style of her dress. It's a long dress. It's probably her best dress, and it is all the way to the ground. My grandmother is in a very short skirt for, the 20s, knee length. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, it's true. There were patterns and rules for dressing, Lisa, that we don't necessarily have today.
Right.
If you were of a certain age, you probably weren't wearing a flapper dress.
Exactly. Or doing the Clairbow, bob.
Right, exactly.
Talking about when they're printed, certainly photographs, the physical state of photographs has changed a lot since they were first invented. What kind of paper or cardstock, what would we expect to see in the 1920s?
Well, that's the other thing too. You need to think about, are there photo albums in your family from the 1920s, early 20s, late teens? what do those photographs look like in the album? If you do the size of the print, you might be able to figure out the camera that they were using. And maybe you even have the negatives, and the size of the negatives will actually tell you some of the cameras. You could just Google that and find that. Because the thing about the cameras is Kodak had a camera and they sold film for it for 50 years. So people didn't necessarily change their cameras as often as we do today. Right? We upgrade our phones, we get new cameras with the phones. But if you had a snapshot camera and you were comfortable using it and the film was still available, you might just continue to use it. So it's tricky. You have to look at the details. You have to look at the format. You have to think about other photographs that might be in the family. Like, what about the descendants of those people? It's always remarkable to me as the photo detective when somebody comes to me with a snapshot and I'm like, this is a great photograph. Look at this. And did you know that cameras could take, 40, 50, 100 photographs? Like, where are the rest of them? Where are the rest of the prints? Why did you get this one? Were all the others bad? Maybe the cameras were not the most technological. It's hard to imagine you could even get a good picture with that tiny little viewfinder. And where are the other photographs? Maybe they got divided up. Maybe they got passed around to family members. So keep that in mind as well. It's a totally different thing.
Reignite a new effort to reach out to distant cousins and start asking those questions. Maureen, I will never. I will never forget when I was going back through my Nikolowski research, and I had a photo that I remember my grandmother pulling out of an old photo album that was at her house. And I knew, she told me, this is my mama. And she was like 17 years old, and she was working in a laundry. And so I assumed from the age of her mother that it was probably taken in Germany. And when I showed it to you and I said, I'd like to revisit this. What else do you think? And why did she pick this photo of all the photos she had in that album? Because she wasn't ready to hand me the album. And I remember you saying to me, well, how wonderful, though, to have a picture of the whole family. And I was like, what? Because there's all these other people in the picture and they're working in the laundry. It never dawned on me. And you were saying, yeah, but in Germany at the turn of the century, and this is not a laundromat. This is probably a family business. And the woman standing there with her head covered is probably mom. And I started checking the census and the other information I had in the family, and every age and sex lined up perfectly for the people who were in the photo. But it was that getting a fresh perspective from somebody who wasn't, right up against it and thinking about it as the 8-year-old that I was when I received the photo. You helped me kind of broaden my context to say, what's the bigger story here and what's the bigger picture and why was it significant? Well, maybe there was something more to it than just my great-grandmother sitting there.
Well, yeah, her photographs come to us with stories.
Yeah.
And are the stories right? And you're right. Why that one photo? Where about all the other photos?
Mm-hmm.
And you have to think about it. And this happens all the time when I work with clients. They'll show me a photo and I'll say, what is that in the background? And they're like, what? Like, you don't even see it. You just are looking so closely at the face or what you're thinking about. You've been told. It's so easy to overlook what might be obvious to somebody else. And I met with a neighbor. She had a distant cousin come from England, actually, and brought a lot of family photographs with her. And they had them spread out and they thought, oh, what a hoot. We'll have Maureen come down and we'll, have tea or whatever. And I was like, okay, I'd love to. So I came down and we spread them out. And the woman says, oh, well, this is so-and-so. And I said, no, it's not. And she said, of course it is. I said, when was she born? No, it's not. And then she's like, oh my goodness. Well then who is this? She had it had come to her with a story that it was this person of this generation, and it was an earlier generation. Maybe
interesting.
With the same name. It was fun. It was really fun. But she was the family genealogist, and so she was very unhappy with herself. She thought she knew it all.
Yeah, and it's the power of a fresh set of eyes, somebody who's not like personally all involved in it, and asking powerful questions, which could just open up doors. And I like your idea of why not ask Google, hey, quick search, England photographs 1920s, just to get a quick overview of what the look is and the styles, and all these things can work together as clues to help us find more photos. Oh, thanks so much for stopping by. We appreciate it. Now we got to go dig and find photos of these people that we're finding in that 1921 census.
And if anybody needs help, I'm online as a photo detective. Happy to help. MaureenTaylor.com, but photo detective on all social media.
Perfect. Thanks so much.
That was fun. Thank you, Lisa.
Thanks for joining me for Genealogy Gems podcast episode number 291. You can find the show notes for this episode over at genealogygems.com, and just go under podcast in the menu, find episode 291. There you're going to get all the details on everything we talked about, see some screenshots of the new census, and of course, if you're a premium member, you can download the ad-free cheat sheet version in PDF form of the show notes, which comes in really handy and is a great reference. And speaking of premium membership, I just want to let you know, yes, I'm getting back to my usual schedule here with podcasting and videos. We have some new videos coming up on our YouTube channel. And that means I've also finally kind of gotten organized, gotten my stamina back from my health issues of last year. And I'm excited to say we're going to be doing some live broadcasts, and these are going to be exclusive for our premium members. You guys have been so patient, and boy, did we really bond over our time together for about 2 years of live shows we did with 11s with Lisa. I am going to send out a survey to you because I want to know when you want to do this, whether we're going to do it Thursday mornings at 11 like we always did, or whether, schedules have changed and life has changed since then. And so certainly I'm open to if we want to do it on a weekend or an evening or whatever. So I will send out a survey in an upcoming newsletter here very shortly so that you have an opportunity to let me know not only when you'd like to do these live shows, but also maybe what you'd like to talk about. I certainly have a stash of items that I want to cover, but I really want to make sure that we are hitting the things that interest you, whatever pain points you have as far as what you're currently dealing with your research, and whatever joys that you want to share, things that have really been accomplishments and that might inspire others listening and watching. So I am really looking forward to this. It's time, and I've got some wonderful people who are lined up to help me produce all this, and I'm just really excited about it. So if you haven't become a premium member, think about it, because we're going to have a lot of fun with this. And of course, the current perks are that you get the ad-free show notes for the downloadable cheat sheets for all the content we do, and you get the premium episodes and videos and things as those come out, and those are always ad-free. Otherwise, just be sure you stay in touch with me, okay? We got lots of content here for everybody. So head to genealogygems.com and click the red button to sign up on our newsletter. We usually put that out once every week or two, so we're not bombarding your inbox, but it's the perfect way to stay in touch with each other. So I hope you'll do that. And you get a free downloadable bonus ebook when you do that. So that's worth doing, right? All right, my friends. Oh, we're off to a great start in the new year. Excited about things to come. Thanks so much for listening, my friends. I'll talk to you soon.